I think there's just something bigger happening in marketing. I mean, I'm not saying anything new. It's been happening for a long time, but just that genuine content that can happen. And sometimes it's just kind of giving it a place like this podcast to happen. It's going to be something where someone goes, wow, that person said exactly what I was thinking, but I'm too afraid to say.
Yeah.
And that's going to spread farther than anything that you're just blatantly marketing yourself with.
Hey, welcome to the Higher Ed Storytelling University podcast here on the B Podcast Network. This is a show dedicated to helping higher ed marketers tell better stories, create better content, and enroll more students. My name's John Azzoni. I'm the founder at Unveiled, and we're a video production company working specifically with college marketing teams to make it easy for them to scale up and even automate their student and alumni success stories through our subscription approach. And you can learn more about that at unveiled.tv, and that's UNVEILD.tv. If you're listening to this podcast for the first time, go ahead and subscribe. We'd love to have you. And if you're wanting your college and university's content to resonate on a deeper emotional level with prospective students, with alumni, with parents, whatever, I want you to subscribe to my free newsletter. Every week I send out tips and insights on creating more emotionally resonant content, including examples and best practices from other institutions, articles and blog posts, that week's podcast episode, and much more. So head over to unveiled.tv/newsletter and sign up. All right, let's get on with the show. Okay, I actually lied. I know I said let's get on with the show in my intro, but quick little pit stop here. If you like this episode, there's a bonus segment of my conversation with Nate Jorgensen, who you'll learn more about in a minute, that you can only get by being a newsletter subscriber. Nate shares a specific marketing tactic that they've added to their recruiting email comms flows at Miami University that's been working surprisingly well. They've seen a significant increase in open rates and engagement. And the other thing that he shares is I have a series, if you follow me on LinkedIn, called Embarrassing Work Stories. And Nate has a really good one. And there's even a video that goes along with it of this embarrassing moment. And you can, again, only get that by being a newsletter subscriber. So go to unveiled.tv/newsletter and sign up. This episode is coming out November 15th. So that content will come in the following week's newsletter. So make sure you're signed up. My guest today is Nate Jorgensen. Nate is the Senior Director of Academic Marketing and Communications at Miami University in Ohio. In this role, he leads the integration of the academic divisions into the central marketing and communication team with a focus on recruitment marketing and storytelling through podcasts and other mediums. Prior to Miami, Nate served for 5 years as the Director of Marketing for the College of Engineering at University of Cincinnati, and he has 20 years of marketing and communications experience with 15 years in higher education. And today we're going to talk about a couple things. We're going to talk about the podcast that Miami University has, which is really unique, cool idea. And we're going to talk about the need for Miami University to have a more centralized marketing presence and the steps that Nate is taking to help the school get there. So Nate, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, John. I'm excited.
So we like to start off by asking a personal question. What is something that people would be surprised to know about you?
One I've used before and that people tend to be surprised is that I have had 7 broken bones and 40 plus stitches in my life.
Wow. And there must be at least one story there.
Let's see. They're just kind of, I played high school football. So that accounts for three of those. And one was an arm break when I was little. And then a couple of them were just like recently have just been like getting old. Like I climbed over some things in the attic and broke ribs doing it. So it's heading downhill fast.
Well, there's always the hazard, like when you start having kids, of like the baby gate, trying to hop over the baby gate. We had one that was kind of difficult to open in our previous house. And my wife and I still to this day have no idea why we had it set up this way, but the baby was upstairs and the master bedroom was downstairs, and we just let that happen. We were like, why did we let the baby sleep on the other side of the house on a different floor. But like we would hear her crying through the monitor, and then I'd like run through the house, run through the downstairs in the dark, and like trip over the baby gate like every other time. Go get the baby. But yeah,
There's probably been more ACLs blown and like shoulders separated by baby gates than blitzing linebackers.
oh my gosh, yeah, for sure. Okay, well, so in preparing for this episode and listening to the podcast that we're going to talk about, it actually reminded me, like, I've had this idea for the last year or so since having this podcast myself about storytelling and working with schools to encourage them with storytelling. I've always thought it would be a really great idea to have a podcast that's just very raw conversations with students, talking about their majors and talking about their struggles and things like that. And here you come and you're like, bro, we've been doing this. You're late to the game. So tell us about the Major Insight podcast.
Yeah, thanks. And it wasn't my idea, and it was something that I noticed in the same way that you did later on. I was interviewing for my job about a year and a half ago, and was doing all the research I could on Miami University, and came across the podcast. It's called Major Insight. It started out to kind of help students find their major. Then it's evolved into helping them find their major, their way, their life at college. And in my researching for my interview, I just noticed, man, this podcast is great. And I probably spent 50% of my interview just talking about the podcast. And it wasn't that big of a focus, if at all, at the university when I got there. It was something that one college was doing. The College of Education had put it together, and it was really just focusing on their students with a couple exceptions. And since that time, we've moved it into our central office, where it's a project that we work on and kind of take care of in every way and have a budget for. Yep. And so now it focuses across the board, and it's really seemed to hit on target with that. What are you going to go through when you're a student? You're going to be homesick, and don't feel like you're the only one feeling homesick. And you're going to feel like you're behind in your classes sometimes if you're challenging yourself. And how so many people feel that way. And what the podcast usually ends up being is it's usually a third or fourth year student who's successful, obviously, who then talks about, like, here's where I started and here's where I came from and this is how I was feeling. And then they give advice to their first year selves, the advice they wish they would have received. And that's exactly what that has been valuable for, is newer students getting that advice early and just seeing that they're not alone in those feelings.
Yeah, it's a really cool concept. I listened to a couple episodes. One was a gal that was injured. You and I talked maybe like a month ago, so so it's a little fuzzy when I listened to it, but from listening to it a few weeks ago. But it was like she was like an athlete, and then she got injured, and that just like redirected her path in college. Is that right?
That's totally right, and I think that's the perfect illustration where, I think she was like, oh, am I going to be a soccer player in college, and take on all that entails. And then she just had injury after injury to her knee that really derailed that. But she spent so much time in physical therapy in high school that in the hours spent doing that in excruciating pain, she started saying, like, well, to her therapist, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? And then got more into like, well, how did you get into this? And now she's in athletic training and really in a good spot in that the way that career can progress. She works for the football team here, and she kind of made a good joke in the episode where she said, I've like traveled everywhere from the Bahamas to Akron, Ohio. And that's kind of like
Yeah.
how college athletic goes. And but yeah, just as having a great experience in the way she talks about it. And I think it certainly would have helped me, coming out of high school, being like, your plans are going to change about 3 times, or something's going to change about them, and
Hmm.
and just be ready to roll with that. Don't be thinking that you're going to have it all figured out right away.
For sure. I feel like it's pretty rare that like someone coming out of high school knows what they want to go into, goes into studies that thing and then becomes that thing. And 50 years later, they're like, it was just a straight path. Most people I talk to are like, they bounce around a little bit and until they kind of find their way. And that's what I really like about the podcast, is just shows like just kind of the honest, nature of college and setbacks and, new things that wouldn't have come were it not for those setbacks. And I like how she talks in that episode about working for the football team, traveling a lot, and she's like, I'll be in class all week, and then the next thing I know, I'm like in the Bahamas or something like that, with the football
Yeah,
team.
like
And
she's like two separate people, because
yeah,
the next that Saturday you're in Paul Brown Stadium for a game, and then on Monday you're back in class and
right,
on the first floor of Upham Hall, and
right.
that is an interesting experience.
Yeah, and the other one I checked out was the mental health. There was a recent, maybe it's like 4 episodes ago, about mental health, and it was a roundtable with 3 or 4 students, and then the host kind of peppering questions about different mental health journeys that these folks have been on. And I just thought that was such a cool episode, and just such a meaningful topic, because I think mental health is becoming less stigmatized. Um, and I think there's probably a realization of high school students that they're going to be homesick, and stuff like that. But I don't think I just know for me, like I struggled with some depression my first semester in college, and I actually, after you and I had our pre-chat, it jogged my memory about this, and I wrote about this in my newsletter about how I went to the Maryland Institute College of Art, and only lasted 1 semester there because I was just struggling, and I was so homesick, and other factors were going on at home that were not helping. But I ended up leaving the college and moving back home, and I always, like, to this day, I'm like, what would it have looked like if I had just like stuck through it more, because I liked that school significantly more than where I ended up, like in terms of being challenged, and stuff like that. So I think it's a really timely sort of topic to have students that are just going through the same thing, and realizing challenges in their college careers that they didn't expect to have.
That is so true. And I too, I've dealt with depression and anxiety my entire life. So it kind of just like piques my attention whenever I hear someone talking in a real way about it. And I had somewhat of a similar experience where I started out college, wanting to go into engineering, as many people do and many people don't succeed in.
Yeah.
And it was I was failing in chemistry and was just freaking out about it. And I had never seen grades like that before.
Mm,
And then you kind of learn the game, especially when you end up working in higher ed later, like, oh, that's, you hope to scrape by and get a C in those classes. For the
right.
most part, I know there's exceptions where it's like you need to ace that class, but it wasn't completely unusual, and I bailed on that in the same way. And that's something that motivates me in my work, I guess, is trying to help that next me who is nervous about whatever that thing may be. And if there are tools out there to help, they should know what they are. And if there are people who have experienced it, they should hear what their stories were to see if they can help. And I have to give credit just clearly, James Loy, who works in our office, he's just an absolute genius when it comes to podcasting, and he's been doing it at Miami for maybe a little less than 10 years now. And so he's put all of this together, and he's kind of seen all of these lines, the storylines that could be told. And so I'm as surprised as anyone when he sends me the draft, the first version of a podcast, and I always just listen to it. And I'm just like, this might be the best one I've ever heard. This one might be the best one I've ever heard. So just great.
What's been the output from the podcast? Like, what's been some results that you've seen, maybe in if there's enrollment results, or if it's retention results, or if it's just people that are like finding a lot of help from this, just anecdotal, comments? What have you been hearing?
It's been a lot of anecdotal so far. I just have on my screen right now the Office of Student Life, just their students made a fan video about the podcast because they love it so much. So there's like students on campus who just love listening to it, love connecting with people who have been on it, and just hear more about people who they might kind of know, and maybe organizations they might kind of know. And then we do hear a lot of the anecdotal stuff. And right now, for the first time, I would say I've been pressing for this in my position for, maybe a little over a year now, to really get this going on a larger scale. I've always thought, and I know that James has thought in his work with it, that this can be a podcast that could help anyone. These don't have to be Miami intending students to benefit from the conversations. The conversations really don't have anything to do with Miami. They always end up talking about Miami, of course.
Right.
And that's obviously great for us. And Miami's a great school, so they end up hearing a lot of good things. But that's where we want to take it. And we're just starting some very preliminary advertising now. And prior to that, we've kind of covered everything that we can on campus and in the recruiting cycle. We're ramping that up just a little bit more, but we're we get cards to put in the bags of students who visit campus that talk about the podcast and say that they can check it out. I know that's kind of hit or miss, but it's what the opportunity we were given. And we have posters up around campus, and send some emails to prospects and admitted students who about the podcast. And those have gotten pretty good attention and grown some. But it really, I'm just a huge advocate for it. So I think it should be bigger. And I think that all the time. And so hopefully we'll get to a point where that's happening more and more.
Yeah. Great. Like top of funnel content strategy, I think, where, I don't think as many people would listen to it or probably even talk about it if it was every episode with a different student of why they like my University of Miami, and
exactly. Yeah.
And that might be the temptation from leadership, is to say, well, if we're going to invest money in this isn't for us to help all college students everywhere. This is for us to bring students to our campus. And that's really the point of view. I think that is the thread across my entire podcast, is like, what would like meaningful content kind of looks sometimes, not always, but sometimes looks like, what would a message be or a story be? What would it sound like if I wasn't allowed to mention the brand? Yeah.
That's
now,
it. And
now you removed that stipulation. Now you can just talk about things that are going to draw people in and keep them engaged. And now it's hosted by the brand, but it's not a commercial for the brand. And that's why I think it's so it's good, for not only University of Miami, students, but I agree with you. I see that could be like a bigger thing. Like this is just a coming of age or whatever, podcast if you are kind of at this point in life wondering these things,
That's 100% right. And I think we've all had those ideas that we've come up with and gone to get the funding for for it or whatever. And then it's like, oh, well, of course, we're going to be mentioning this program and for people to apply every 30 seconds. And it's like, no one's listening then. Like, no one has any reason to listen to it then, because they don't want a commercial for Miami. They want something that's going to help them. And I think there's just something bigger happening in marketing. I'm not saying anything new. It's been happening for a long time, but just that genuine content that can happen. And sometimes it's just kind of giving it a place, like this podcast, to happen. And of course, I think every episode is great because, I just really like the people who do it. But it's going to be something where someone goes, wow, that person said exactly what I was thinking, but I'm too afraid to say. And that's going to spread farther than anything that you're just blatantly marketing yourself with. And that's a big thing for us right now. We're Miami University, we're in the middle of Ohio. No one understands anything about any of that if they hadn't heard of the place. And so we're fighting some battles right off the bat. And so like they just don't have an immediate association with them. But if we can become a source, we do undergraduate education really well. It's something that we focus on more than a lot of the institutions in our area who do a lot of other things very, very well. And maybe we can become kind of a source for helpful information in that way. And then, of course, what's going to happen is you're going to end up getting more traffic. You're going to end up, someone's going to listen to it, check out that program, and then think, oh, well, they said they had a good time and it was a genuine story. So all that stuff happens, but I just don't, you have no chance if you're just plain marketing on a podcast. You at least give yourself a chance if you're doing something genuine.
Right, for sure. Side note, for people wondering, and I'm one of these people, why is there a Miami University in Ohio?
Great question. Thanks for, because people usually don't ask. So Miami University existed before the state of Florida existed. Miami University was founded in 1809. And so that's one of the sayings around campus is that we were a university when Florida still was owned by Spain. And we in this area live in the Miami Valley. There's a Miami River, there's a little Miami River, and that goes all the way back to indigenous people. And we have a strong relationship with the people who were in this area that started up a couple decades ago and has really gotten stronger and stronger. So, and I've heard differing opinions on like how the names ended up the same, because there's Dayton here, then there's also Daytona Beach, and then there's Miami, kind of the Miami area here, and then obviously Miami. And
there's
some
Maumee,
people
Ohio.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I don't know if there's a connection there, but
yeah, right. And so I've heard some stories saying that like, yeah, those were Ohio people going down and starting things down there and just calling them what they were familiar with. And I've heard other ones too. So I'm not sure exactly what the thing is. So, but yeah, like the University of Miami in Florida, I think was founded, I'll get emails about this if it's wrong, but sometime in the early 1900s, maybe like the 1920s or something like that. So Miami University obviously was around for like 110 years before all that. But then of course they exploded in fame in a lot of ways with their athletic teams and everything like that. So it's an interesting problem to try to tackle as a marketer, but it's kind of fun too.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of intriguing. It reminds me, I had Andy Fuller from Notre Dame on the podcast bunch of episodes ago, and he was talking about this idea of narrative ownership and these questions that people have about your school that become rumors or just folklore, and the importance of like just setting them straight from the school's perspective. So you heard it here first, or maybe this is not the first time, but you heard some narrative ownership here from Nate Jorgensen.
Great. Yes. Good start.
So I also want to say, backing up to the podcast, your host, I want to mention before we go forward to the centralization stuff, your host is really good. And I think she does a really good job. And that's one person, right? That's one person hosting. Yep. It's not like a different host every episode.
Nope, okay. It's one person, Meredith. She is an undergrad from West Virginia, and she is in an a cappella group. If you listen long enough, you kind of know all these things. But so she's a speech pathology major from West Virginia in an a cappella group, and is just someone who can perform very comfortably. Yeah. She sought us out, James, and I ended up getting involved because she had heard the podcast and said, "Oh, I really like it, and can I try out for it?" And we're like, "You're in," because we don't have anybody else. Yeah. And a very interesting. Right. Yeah. Because our old host, who is also phenomenal, Jason, and he is doing professional audio work now. Right now, Meredith is going to graduate in April, and we're like kind of like crap. Like that's not good for us. And so now, when James just put out the call for some applicants, we got like dozens of applicants from the theater department, from the communications department, from all of those different areas. So now it's becoming something that's bigger than just kind of us throwing it together. And it's such a credit to her. When you know this well, of course, but when you hear the final product, a couple times I've sat in on the recording and I have been like, I don't know how they're going to get something out of that recording. The person was way too nervous, right? And they had to start and stop way too many times, not through their fault, but just because of whatever. And then because of what she does and how James in this case puts it together, it ends up sounding like NPR to me. Yeah. And it's just incredible. And that's kind of, I guess, just the magic of that platform. And I've been a podcast person from pretty early on. I would say like in 2009, I started right when I got an iPhone, I started listening to podcasts. So I've been doing that just in my life. And so I've been familiar with that way of communicating. And so then maybe had a bit of an ear for that when I started hearing those when I got here.
Yeah, that was the thing I noticed almost immediately. It was, this sounds like it sounds like a national podcast. This is like NPR was exactly what I was thinking.
That's absolutely right. And James comes from a radio background as well. So that was completely by chance. The director at the marketing director, Aaron at the College of Education, just kind of took a chance on him to do other things, but with that background. And now it's me taking a lot of credit doing interviews for stuff that I had absolutely nothing to do with, other than just recognizing that it's great and that I'm not going to take no for an answer when it comes to doing more with it.
Yeah, and it's a testament too to how the power of editing. I remember in my, you just made me think of some of the first videos I ever edited. I remember I had this, I was working for my buddy, this previous production company. And we had this project where we had to like crank out like 20 of these like personal testimonies for a church. And so I got really good at combing through an interview and like cutting a compelling story together. But then towards the end, we hit this one girl who was so nervous. And I kid you not, she stopped like 2 or 3 times every sentence to like recompose herself. And I was watching the raw footage like, there is no way we're going to put anything together with this. ended up muscling it together, and it was actually one of the best videos of the entire series.
I can believe it.
It's bizarre how that happens, but it really comes down to the editor. Like, the power of editing is like, when you can get someone that can work around those things and cut to different cameras and have tricks and things to work around those pauses and stuff, it makes a world of a difference. I've had so many people that I filmed in the past that thought they were going to do terrible in the final product, and even just with a little bit of editing, they're like, oh my gosh, I sound great.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I bet too, like, many times it's those people who are nervous, because they have an active brain and they probably have a lot to say, and there's a lot of interesting information in there if it can be kind of smoothed out in the way that you all magically do.
Right. Yeah. Then that's pro tip. That's why we film with 2 cameras.
Nice. Yes.
So you can always
cut at any time.
Just cut at any time and just switch to the other camera like it was the same sentence.
Yeah. Awesome.
Quick break here. I have a question for you. Have you ever had to manage the production of a video before for your school, where you were the person that had to coordinate all the scheduling? Like, you had like 5 people that needed to be interviewed for this thing, and you had to juggle all the schedules and figure out how to line them up for individual slots miraculously on the same day. And on top of that, you had to talk to your facilities guy and make sure the door to the engineering lab was going to be open at a certain time so the crew could get in there, film some B-roll. You had to coordinate volunteers to be in the footage and blah, 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 and, right? Let me tell you something. Working with an outside video vendor should not look like this. Unfortunately, I've worked with enough video folks to know that the mainstream school of thought is they will coordinate the crew and all the production stuff, the editing, etc., and they will expect you to coordinate all your folks. And I'll be honest, sometimes there's stuff that the video people just can't coordinate for you. Like, I'm probably not going to email your college's president out of the blue to ask them to be in this video and to coordinate their schedule when they've never heard of me or this project. Like, that just makes more sense coming from you, at least to get their initial buy-in. But as much as possible, your job should be to get buy-in from all the right people and then introduce those stakeholders to the video producer to coordinate, which is not you. Unfortunately, we live in a world where it just doesn't work like that most of the time. In fact, I talked to a marketing director at a pretty well-known art school recently who told me he hired this video crew to film a couple program promo videos, and they paid a lot of extra money. This was a bit of a splurge, is the impression I got. And they got 2 videos out of the deal. And he said to me, all that money we paid, and I still had to coordinate everything. Like, we paid a premium for someone to do these videos, and I was doing all the grunt work. So here's the deal. At Unveiled, one of the things we take really seriously is making sure the process is easy on you, especially that pre-production process, which is where a lot of the not fun stuff tends to show up. So whether we're working together through our video storytelling subscriptions, a big commercial, or maybe a smaller one-off video project, know that in addition to delivering a great end product, we also have our eyes on making that a smooth and oftentimes fun journey along the way. And even after it's done, we want to make sure you're set up for success, which is why we give you all the raw footage, all that B-roll and interview footage to repurpose however you want at no extra charge. So if you have video needs right now, don't let the management of those projects stress you out. We are your partners in taking as much work off your plate as possible. So if that's you, I want you to head over to unveiled.tv. That's unveiled.tv and book a call with me. And let's talk about how we can best support you. All right, back to the show. Moving forward, so the podcast is kind of a conglomerate of a lot of different departments, and that's been important to, your work in your role at Miami University is kind of helping to join all these departments together and centralize a little bit. So tell me how's the podcast like kind of help you do that, and then talk about a little bit about some of these conversations that you're having.
Yeah, great question. And that's what I would just say, something like this, like the podcast has just helped smooth that out a little bit. So maybe over 2 years ago, Miami made the decision at the very top levels to consolidate things. I think a lot of universities did that around COVID. And and so marketing was one of them. And so instead of having, a team of 4 or 5 in each college at times, or zero in each college, that there was going to be one central marketing and communications office, and a team member from that central team within the college, but not necessarily it's their own team, just of their own. And so obviously in higher ed, with anything, and especially when you're kind of, you could look at it in different ways, but you're taking something away, and there's going to be a lot of bad feelings about that. And for a big part of my start in this position was just going in and listening to people, and really giving people almost a year to just get it out. Let me have it, and let me know all the things that are so hard and bad about this. And they're not wrong either, but we are doing this. And so how do we make it work? And then, so for something like Major Insight, to have a podcast like this, that is, like we've been talking about, such an amazing product that they really didn't have access to before. It was something that was done in one college. But now to be able to go to the College of Engineering, or the School of Business, or the College of Arts and Science, and even have a bit of a strategy of be on the lookout for students who would be good candidates for this, either through their experiences or even just through how they communicate, or both. And then they're getting more exposure through that. We haven't done this all the way, and it's just from being busy. But, we want to try to use the podcast and use the content in as many ways as possible, as everyone does. So to have the transcript for SEO, and to have little snippets, and to have quotes from the podcast to use in marketing copy, and to have little short videos that show, the really interesting parts of each one that you can use more on social media. We're getting there and trying to do that more and more, but, just long story short, and I could keep going on and on, that's just one of those examples where it's like, well, now, because we are all together, we are all able to use this resource, and to get some time in the chair to be interviewed, and to get your story out about your program. And that's more of just like finding people who are interesting to talk to, and then, like we said earlier, just letting the conversation be natural, and not telling them to talk about anything necessarily. But it always turns into great content. It just always seems to work well for people.
Yeah. What do you guys have a strategy when it comes to sourcing people to be on the podcast from the different schools? Does it just come down to having conversations with those different professors and things like that, or do you guys have a submission link that people can submit to, or how's that work?
There is a submission link that's not like, we haven't really widely promoted it or anything, but it's like within the listing, the episode listing page, there is a contact form. But one of those things, like going back to the anecdotal stories that you hear, like we have posters up all around campus, and so our host Meredith is really like kind of a very socially engaged, and so people will see her on the poster, then come up and talk to her and ask her about the podcast. We've found maybe 10 or so guests just through that, or through then people realizing they know the person who's on it and recommending someone to be a guest because they have a great story. And then in working with the individual colleges now as a central unit, that's where we're just kind of always putting out feelers, and different colleges do it in different ways, where they might have a form that they email out to their listserv saying, we're looking for student stories, maybe for a variety of applications. But but having them fill that out, their name and all their particulars, but then also kind of like what's your story? What's the part that's the hook about your story? And so that can kind of escalate some stories that you get, and then other ones become just a nice little web feature to have within one department's section of the website. So yeah, and again, that we probably haven't gotten official enough with that yet, maybe because it's been happening so naturally. But that's probably a direction that we're going to be heading soon, is just having more of a system for that. We've worked with some classes recently on producing episodes and even putting together content for episodes. So we're more and more wanting the media studies department to be involved in the podcast, and I could really see it kind of going places from there, and even having like maybe spin-off podcasts where if it's someone talking about something else, maybe something not as tight as ours and clean in the end, I would be okay with that, at least just as long as it's entertaining and somewhat appropriate. But I just see a lot of opportunity there too, if we can just get more and more students involved, and it's great experience for them. Like this is the name of the game. You and I are doing this right now as part of surviving. And so that is what the world is like. So that's something that we really like to do too, just kind of across the board, just get students involved as much as possible.
Yeah, for sure. I do like that student to student aspect of the podcast. It makes it feel more just accessible, I think. And then speaking of just like centralizing, the campus, what challenges have you experienced in trying to make that transition? What challenges do you guys experience? Kind of like do all the requests for creative and marketing content come through you guys, for example, and is that difficult? Or
it is. I think I've experienced every challenge and have gone through and am going through many different phases of that. When I got there and I was hired into the position that runs this part, as academic director, that was the job that I signed up for. So initially there's just kind of instant hostility when it comes to that, and it's not your fault coming in. And I try, like I said before, I tried to just be a listener for a long time and maybe offer some ideas, and maybe most of all just say, like, how can I help you for a while? What's something that you're struggling with now because things have changed that I can help you with? And kind of because of my background, I'm fortunate where I just have a lot of experience in a lot of different things, and not great at any one thing, but I can do it. So if someone said, I haven't had a story published in a week, and I would just be like, give me the student's name and give me a couple days and I'll have a story for you. So that's kind of like an example of where it's like I would just get in and do it, and then kind of hopefully build that trust that, I'm here to help you, and we're here to help you make this work, and not to just completely go a different direction away from the work that they had been doing, and they had been doing good work. And, at every spot, some deans are very supportive and understand right away. And some deans are hostile to the idea. And, but it really has been, even the deans that, are maybe hostile is a too strong of a word, but again, it's a challenge. Higher ed is a challenge, and working in such a big organization is a challenge. And with being a public institution is another part of the challenge. Like, it's just nonstop, really nonsense at times, where it's just like you're just dealing with stuff coming down, things changing, and you have to roll with it. You have to keep finding a way to move stuff forward, roll with it. So everyone has done a really good job of that. But I just want to illustrate what I'm hoping to illustrate is just like people were all over the board, where it was just like, don't want to talk to you for a couple months. I got to cool down. and others were just like, hey, come on right in. Let's talk about how to do this. So we've gotten to a really good place right now. I just recently kind of did a reset with everyone where I went through and said, here's what I've found over my first year and a half. And basically what I've concluded is that where we can help most as academic communicators and marketers is in the yield cycle for recruitment. And so when we have prospective students who have applied to a specific program, that's when the colleges can really do their most concentrated, effective work. So like this spring, for example, we're going to be sending out marketing emails, but informational and marketing emails based on the student's major of interest, and sometimes multiple majors of interest. So that's not something that I've found a whole lot of other people doing. I think people have had the idea to do it and have done some part of it, but we're starting this year after kind of a slow rollout last year to really have a heavy project of having each major get a significant marketing email done for them and have all of that genuine content, hopefully, and really then be able to take that, measure it, see how it did. The stuff we did last year really had great numbers behind it. And so that's why we ramped it up a little bit. And then I could see us then maybe moving more into the app generation phase with some of this content that we've started in the yield process. And then, kind of in between all of that, there's just all the little things that flare up where it's like, there's this publication that's going out to prospective students and make sure everyone agrees on what's in there. And, there's 10 of those per week. But then the emails thing has kind of been the project that I've seen an opportunity for. And what I was saying is I just checked in with all of the deans, and it was just so rewarding and nice to hear where they were just like, we think that's right on, knowing
Cool.
all of the other things, variables that we have. We see your reasoning and we like what we see. So kind of the first time I've felt that or heard that since I've been here, which is fine because it is new and you don't expect someone to just go along instantly with what you're saying. So just wanted to say with all of that, like I just feel like we're at a really good place now where now we have a place to build on top of that.
That's awesome. That sounds really hard, but glad you're making progress. I know that must be hard to enter into the pool of alligators or whatever into the lion's den.
Well, thanks. Yeah. And I'm really glad, like right when COVID hit and I kind of went through I went through COVID and I went through kind of the 2020 racial reckoning events, which were so sorely needed and appropriate. But I was navigating some really tough waters at my job at UC and at UC Engineering. And really what I found in that time, I was like, I did it. I can do this. I did not do it perfectly. I did it, but I did it very genuinely and did some other things that just kind of worked. And so that's where then I started thinking like, I want to be a CMO. I want to eventually be a CMO. So that started me listening to higher ed marketing podcasts, and I got connected with Bart Kaler through his and listened to his, and then ended up just kind of emailing all of the people who had been interviewed on there. And now all of these people are just like the biggest shakers in the business with Jamie Hunt and Ethan Braden and Jenny Petty. They all emailed me right back. They all said, let's set up a meeting for the next couple of days. Let's talk. And Jamie was at Miami at the time. And then a year and some change later, she ended up getting a hold of me about the job and said to apply. And then I was fortunate enough to get it. So just kind of wanted to say that. And maybe for anyone out there who's aspiring in the same way, like I saw that challenge as something that I needed to learn in order to become a CMO someday. And I'm really thankful that I did it.
That's awesome. Well, anyone that's listening to this podcast, if you are hiring for a CMO, I've got a guy right here.
Thank you.
But no, this has been a really awesome conversation. I mean, I say that to every guest, but even if this was a bad conversation, I would say that. But this was actually a very good conversation.
Thank you. For me too.
Yeah, it's fun to have. It's funny because I actually found you on Bart's podcast, and that's part of my routine just as a podcast host and a business owner is I have like a 30-minute drive to the gym every day. So I count that because I work from home. So I'm like, I just count that as like my drive to work, and I listen to some higher ed marketing podcasts, and I'm like, who can I find on here that I can connect with? That's how I heard you on that podcast, and we got connected that way. So highly recommend that strategy. That's why we're here today.
Yeah, nice. It's funny how that works out, and obviously worked out in my career as well too, is just by when people say reach out at the end of the podcast to these people, it's like, seriously, reach out.
Yeah, seriously.
Like, anyone in any position, especially in this business, that I've found is just so willing to help and talk, and I'm certainly the same way.
Yeah, I started guesting on more podcasts lately, and I love when people reach out to me, even if they don't have much to say or they don't have a business proposition or anything, just to say, hey, I heard you on that podcast and it was cool. I'd like totally, and I will like be like, hey, let's grab coffee, a virtual coffee or something like that. Like even if it's not a super relevant connection to my business or my podcast, like I just love meeting new people, and I love when people just say hi.
Absolutely. And I think I picked that up really early too, from just being a podcast person. Like I would always listen to comedy podcasts, like comedians podcast. And then I would find them on Twitter. Like that just kept introducing me to more comedians, and would email them. And some of them aren't famous yet. They're famous now, some of them, but they weren't famous at the time. And you could just message them on Twitter and they would say, hey, thanks. I'm going to be in Detroit and I hope you come to the show.
That's cool. Do you listen to the Nate Land podcast? Nate Bargatze?
No, not that one. And I've heard a lot of good things about it, and people have been talking about him with Saturday Night Live recently. That was so good. And I've fallen off a little bit because I've gotten more into my business, my professional podcast, but there are a couple that I listen to all the time.
Yeah, there's very few podcasts that I like. Actually, Nate Land is the only podcast that I'm actually like really trying to like listen to all, like, I don't know, there's almost 200 episodes now, and I like really try to stay up on that one. But yeah, most of my podcasts that I listen to are the higher ed marketing podcasts, but I always go back to that one because it's just really interesting. It's like, it's not like stand-up comedy. It's like a few comedians kind of sitting around a table just talking about dumb stuff, but just something about,
I think that is the best comedy, I think, too. Like I've had the experience a lot of times where I listen to someone's podcast for a really long time, and then I watch their special, and it's kind of a letdown because their podcast is so funny and so spontaneous, and you realize kind of the cadence and the atmosphere is different in a special or in a theater, in whatever way that is. But it's just like, if I had the choice, I would just listen to another podcast, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, for sure. I feel the same way. There's two different kinds of funny. It's like there's witty, and then there's like, I can put together an act. And if you can do both of those, I think Nate Bargatze is a great example of someone who is like incredibly witty in the moment on his podcast and also hilarious like in a staged performance. Anyway, not relevant to the topic of the higher ed storytelling. We'll go on for another couple hours about this. That's just a bonus. Okay, cool. Well, this has been great. Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, John. I really appreciate it too. All the best.
Well, that was a great conversation. This is just John here, by the way. I ended the chat with Nate and realized I forgot to let him plug his contact information. So you can reach him via email or LinkedIn. His email address is JORGENNP, Jorgen P, at miamioh.edu. So you can email him, reach out to him, and then you can also follow him on LinkedIn. Nate's a great follow. Really enjoyed getting to know him over the past few weeks. So definitely go connect with him. Also a reminder about the bonus email marketing tactic and embarrassing work story that Nate shares. That's available exclusively for newsletter subscribers. That will come out in next week's newsletter. So make sure you're signed up. Okay, now we can end the show. Thanks for listening. 3 things I want to give you before you go. Number 1, reminder to sign up for my free weekly newsletter, all about creating content that resonates emotionally with your audience. And you can do that at unveiled.tv/newsletter. Unveiled is spelled UNVEILD. Number 2, if you've enjoyed this episode, share it with someone. Share it with your team, your boss, your dog, whatever. And if you're not already subscribed, I'd love for you to do that. Number 3, reach out to me. If you have comments, questions, you want to talk about a video project, whatever, my email is john@unveiled.tv. John is spelled JOHN. Or follow me on LinkedIn. If you're searching for me, my last name is spelled AZONI. That's all for today, and I look forward to catching you on the next episode of the Higher Ed Storytelling University podcast. Thanks.